Ew. If you don't watch until the end of the video, you're going to get a really bad cramp in your leg. Alright. What's going on? Well, number one, I did make a Discord server. I'm just going to remind you for the next couple of videos because someone asked and I made one. It's really shitty, there's nothing on it, but if you want to say something and you don't feel like commenting on a video, then there you go. Alright, what are we talking about today? Well, I mentioned the Overlord light novel in my last video, and it kind of made me want to talk about it because it's probably my favorite light novel and just a really, 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 really solid series. So that's what I'm gonna do. If you haven't seen these videos before, the general idea is I'm gonna give you a rating off the bat and then go into why I gave you that rating. Not really going to get too much into spoilers, but you know, I'll just give you some general reasons as to why I think you should or should not read this series. For the Overlord light novel specifically, here's I'm biased. I want to be expressly clear. I am really, really, really biased. I enjoy this series a ton. It's probably like one of the series that just really just hit every kind of little thing I liked. So I'm super biased. So I think as far as a rating goes, I would have to be either a 9 or a 10. When I say a 10, it's not necessarily that it's perfect, it's just my favorite within a type of series. So, you know, my favorite isekai, or my favorite, you know, fantasy in general, or my favorite action story, you know, things like that, basically. So it's not like a 10, like, oh, it's perfect, it's just my favorite. So yeah, I think it would be either my 10 or a very, very close contender as a 9. It is one of my favorite series ever. So, I mean, I guess I have to cover some reasons why, and also some little nitpicky elements that I think you might want to know. Number one, I am specifically talking about the light novel because I do not think the anime is as good. And I don't think the manga is as good. Why, might you ask? Well, in the anime, something that you might notice, and hey, maybe this is just my opinion, but something that I felt, is that in the anime there is a certain... Okay, if we talk about Season 1, right? What was the goal for Season 1? It was just to make, you know, people really like, you know, the idea of the series, right? It's to make the series look good. So what did they do? Well, I mean, they have to appeal to something, so they wanted to appeal to this, like, oh, it's super dark, it's super cool. You'll notice Ainz kind of switches a switch, like, he flips a switch, basically, and instantly doesn't have any problems, you know, fighting hundreds of undead or killing people. You know, like, he might reference it slightly here and there, like, oh, that was weird, why didn't I care? But, like, it's an instant switch. If you read the novelization, you get a little bit more into, like, what he's thinking. Something I often use as an example of this is, there's a point, I don't remember the exact episode, and I don't remember the exact point in the novel, but there is a point where Ainz is going up to the vault, basically, to get some items. He needs some world items when he's going to go fight Sheltier, and he needs some other items, right? He goes up to this vault, and the vault asks, like, a password, basically. Now, in the novel, he forgets. He does not know. He is unaware, and he is, like, a little, like, I don't exactly remember. And you know, it's kind of like you could get a little of that human element, right? Like, he's not just, like, some infallible guy that remembers every single detail of the game. He's like, I think it's this, I think... In the anime, how they played it off, he's like, well, I think it's this. You know, and it's like, how that's portrayed is more like he's jokingly saying he might forget when in reality he didn't. I think that's an example of the nuance between the two for me. And I don't want to say the anime is bad, it's just that the anime is like a little bit of a different style, and I prefer the manga. So there's a little nuance there where it's like, the intent in the anime is to make Ainz look cool, whereas in the story it's more to make him relatable. So I think in the story, I find Ainz to be significantly more relatable, where it's like, this is a guy that is brought into a world, and he is slowly being driven down and down and down in morality toward an undead. So he starts off more like a normal person, and then he slowly reaches this point where it's like, oh man, he is, he is not what we would call human anymore. He is getting more and more like an undead. And I think that's a little bit of an example of the nuance between the two series that I prefer with the light novel. I want to make it really clear this video is going to be a lot of yapping. I want to move on. I don't want to go too deep into that first part. I have a couple of points I want to hit. I'm not going to cover everything. If you want me to talk about specific arcs or things like that, I will, but I'm only going to mention things kind of briefly. But I think that's what the nuance between the two stories is. The anime wants to make him look cool, whereas the manga wants to make him relatable, I guess. And I feel like that's the vibe you get between the two. A lot of the plot points are similar, it's just you get a little more insight into what Ainz is thinking. Now, there's some other things I want to talk about. Sheltier, here's a thing that I think is kind of interesting between the two, that I like better in the manga. So in the manga, I think the idea of, I mean, not manga, the light novel, I'm sorry, that's my bad. In the light novel, right, there's this idea that they have game elements in this world, but a lot of it kind of is pushed toward this reality, right? Like there's a sense of reality, and the world is kind of leaning toward this sense of reality. Whereas in the anime, it's more like, it's more like a game, right? So where does this nuance come in? Well, we see, I don't know, let's say Sheltier versus like all the bandits and Brain and all of them. I know this isn't that part specifically, but I'm just saying, like, a little prior to this little fight. The Sheltier versus Brain and all that, all those bandits. Here's where we see a little bit of nuance. In the novel, Sheltier gets pelted by, arrows, right? She gets pelted by arrows, and they pierce her. They go right through, right? Like, she gets stabbed with these arrows. How they describe these arrows impacting her is more like she gets pierced, and then it basically instantly heals. She's a vampire, she's undead, her skin isn't made of metal, right? She's still a creature, so she doesn't have scales and things like that, she's humanoid. So when something hits her skin, it bursts through. If she was wearing armor, of course, that's a different story, but she's not. She's just normal Sheltier. But I think in the novel it's a little bit of a more interesting thing because it feels more visceral. Like you hear like, oh man, the arrow pierces her skin, blood, oh my god, and then they just slowly heal out of her skin like Wolverine heals when like bullets fly out of him or something, Like it is a visceral reaction. What happens in the anime? Well, they just kind of get knocked out. She just swats them, they bounce off of her. So it's more like this video game idea. I kind of like the nuance of things being more like reality, and it's kind of like the game is shifting into this reality. I'm sure there's a million other examples, this is just the one that came to my mind, but I think it is kind of like one of those little elements that's different between the two stories, that I think is something to, take note of. Now, I do want to say, like, if I'm comparing the two, it's kind of like, the anime would be like an 8, the manga is like a 9 or a 10. So it's not like, completely in different leagues. It's just one is better than the other, in my opinion. I want to move on from this point, though. But what I want you to understand is the way that the world interacts with the game characters is a lot more, I don't know, I would say there's a lot more equality. The world has a lot more influence over the game Whereas in the other story, the game has a lot more influence over the world. I think it's just something to take note of. I like the idea of the world having more influence over the game. What's next? Well, this is more so just for me to briefly discuss. I believe it's So-Bin who's the illustrator, if you see down there. His work is so good. There's different illustrations through the art covers. I think he does some throughout the books a lot of the time. They're so good. One of the anime endings, I believe, has a albedo ending where it's drawn by So-Bin, I think. His art is so good. I just love it. And I just want to express that really quickly. I think that is another big boon. Every time I see it, it's so good. I always buy the art books. I love it. Yeah, I just want to make that clear. Like, it's a small plot point, but it is something to take note of. I think now the last main thing I want to get into is just like some arcs that I really like, and mainly one arc. If you've read the light novel, I don't think you're surprised. The Sacred Kingdom arc is so good. It is so good. It is like unbelievably this is incredible. This was one of my favorite arcs in anything I've read, watched, anything. This is so good. The basic gist is it doesn't have Ainz as like, okay. The novelization, you see this in the anime too, but I feel like they haven't gotten to a lot of this yet. But the novelization, it has a lot of elements like, I guess you would say, like Season 2 of the anime, where it followed Sebes rather than Ainz for the most part. So this arc follows a I guess you could call her like a ranger, but like a paladin / ranger from another kingdom. The Sacred Kingdom. And she's basically the main character. Ainz is kind of like a supporting character. The interest in this arc is that you get to see her perspective, like a perspective of a local to this world, versus Ainz, right? So you have a local in this world, and you kind of get to see their view of, Ainz, who at this point, is a known figure in this world, who is known to be, basically the undead king. He is like, this almighty figure. So you get to see, these lower tiered fighters and their interactions, perceptions, views of Ainz, and it is super fun. I love that idea. I love seeing another character just skipping to their point of view, watching everything from their point of view, seeing things that like Ainz is, planning, Demiurge is planning, and how they react to it when they don't know everything that we know. So good. I love it. It's one of the best arcs ever, period. Some of the plot points are amazing. Demiurge, I don't want to get into spoilers of what it looks like, but he does have a transformation. If you haven't seen it, pretty cool, especially what he does with it. Little violent, but hey, it's Overlord, and that's to be expected. It's just, this is probably the best arc you could get in this kind of story. I love following another character other than the main character, seeing their reactions to this world. It feels like there's a very good through line, like it's a campaign through this territory in order to get, where they need to go and save the people they need to save. Seeing the distrust between, certain individuals. Oh, it is peak Overlord. So good. I really cannot express how much I enjoyed this. It's it's perfection. It's one of the best arcs in anything I've ever seen. I love, I love seeing Demiurge's plans on this like grand scale. Um, I love seeing like the different, characters from this kingdom. I love seeing interactions between characters and Ainz. I love seeing Ainz form like this, relationship with different characters throughout the world and how they all kind of connect back. It's just so good. I don't want to spoil anything that happens during this. There's incredible moments. I love a lot of it. I love that a lot of the characters are, introduced, but we get to see them interact with old school characters. We get to see like how the perception of people from this world is on, Ainz and such. It is incredible. I think, yeah, I think that those are the main things to talk about. I guess I'll do the old SAE for the sake of, I don't know, whatever, which is story, art, enjoyment. Art isn't really that relevant, I have to admit, in this series. I think it's just kind of like a little bit of a cherry on top when you get like a new piece halfway through a story, so you can kind of visualize what's going on. But I love the art so much, it's a 10. Enjoyment's a 10. Art-wise, story-wise, here's the thing. The story is told in arcs, so some arcs are better than others, obviously. A lot of the earlier arcs can be a little bit slow. There's some boring elements, but then it has stuff like the Sacred Kingdom, which is like a 10. So I think I would have to go between an 8 and a 10 for me. So what does that mean overall? I would say on the lowest end, we're getting a 9, but it's probably a 10 out of 10 story. It is probably my favorite story in general. I love it. I could not gush any more about it, really. I mean, well, I'll try if you want me to, but yeah, it's a 9 or 10 story for me. Like I said, a 10 basically just means, it's my favorite within a certain genre. So there's a limited amount of 10s, and this one gets it for me. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much more to say. Just read it. Yeah, I'd appreciate it if you could like, comment, subscribe, maybe leave another story that you want me to read down below. Even if I've read it, I'll read it again. I don't really care. And yeah, I'll see you.